And we are back. We are here for part 5, week 5 of the conflict, brought to you by Irregular Warfare Initiative. This is going to be the 5th part of our series covering the geoeconomic implications of the ongoing conflict in Iran. So we're joined here today by another esteemed group of professionals and experts in this realm. So we're going to give everyone the opportunity to go around, give a quick introduction of who you are, and give some context to what we're going to bring to the discussion today. So Yanni, let's start with you.
Ioannis Koskinas, I'm the CEO of Hoplite Group, obviously here on my personal discussion points, not my company, but I spent 20 years in the military, mostly in special operations. And then since then, I got out, started working in mining and corporate social responsibility, and then went into government contracting with Hoplite Group, mostly focusing in the Middle East and Central Asia.
Should I go next? So good.
So Hamlet Yousef, I'm involved here with the Irregular Warfare Initiative as well. I've spent a career in the private sector, as well as government, focusing on the national security space, ethnically Iranian. So my critique of the regime will be very poignant. Run a venture fund called Iron Gate Capital Advisors with a couple of other partners, and we invest in tech that goes at the intersection of national security and defense. And so pretty keen understanding of some of the dynamics at play here, and not only the Iran conflict, but Ukraine and elsewhere as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Hamlet. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks. Tom Johansmeyer, co-director of the Economic and Legal Warfare Project at the Irregular Warfare Initiative. By day, I work in the reinsurance industry here in Bermuda, where I've done stuff around alternative risk transfer, exotics, emerging markets, cyber. So I have a keen interest in some of these issues, and I just submitted my doctoral thesis to the University of Kent, which I'll be defending in the next 90 days, where I look at how the insurance industry's hyperbolization of cyber war risk actually creates an economic security problem by impeding capital flows. I spent 5 years in the Army, 2 of them on active duty, and I worked in the Milpo and then the S1 shop, so I hid behind the shield.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. And congrats on that. You're going to be a busy man for the next several weeks. And Ed, you are the newcomer to the group. We're excited to hear your insights this week.
Really happy to be here, Jackie. Thank you. Ed Bogan, founder of the Institute for the Study of States of Exception, which is a research institute focused on weaponization of emergency powers around the globe. I also served in CIA for 24 years, heavy involvement in the global war on terror in the first half of my career, and the second half was heavily framed by the battle between Ukraine and Russia.
Perfect. Yeah, that's going to be excellent for today's discussion. So, I think top of mind for everybody this morning is the president's address on the 1st of April. So let's start there. So we got a lot of context around the progress, according to the president, of where we are right now in the fight. Lots of conversation after the fact about timelines and what does this mean. But we've spoken extensively on that at this point in the series of what the importance of timelines, or maybe not. So let's start there. I'd like to, Yanni, let's start with you on getting some of your takeaways from what the president had to say last night.
Yeah, it was. I think Hamlet and Tom will probably handle something along the lines of national security orientation. I'll jump off for a second to just say I was with my brothers, and they work in maritime shipping last night. We were watching the talk, and their perspective was unique. So I'll share that insight. Price of the barrel was going up as the conversation was happening. It ended up being 12 by morning. It was $12 increase per barrel. So they were looking at it because the markets in Asia were either just about to open or had already opened. And so people were looking at this. Is it going to go one way where we're basically announcing the end of the conflict, or at least the winding down, or the moment that they, you could hear the president speak those words that said, and we're, going to punish them for another 2 to 3 weeks. You can almost see, the alarm clocks and going off on it. Now, I'm not a financial wizard. I'm in the classic buy high, sell low, markets when it comes to housing. So, but I could tell you that certainly people were paying attention to that. On the other end, we also didn't see any indicators as to which way this is going to go, whether there's going to be an escalation, whether there's going to be, some ground war considerations. It would, the president kept his cards tight to his chest, and I'll just pass it over to Hamlet, see what he thinks. Over.
Yeah, no, good assessment. I didn't hear anything remarkably new. I had a couple of side wagers with some friends going into the bingo card of what he was going to announce, either some sort of a peace breakthrough, escalation, or we're going to just leave. Obviously, none of those happened. So I'm defaulting back to what my assessment was and has been, which is we're going to see this continued escalation to de-escalate. I don't think we're anywhere near that. I do think that we have a very skewed and false fixation on the price of crude. Where's the S&P at? Where's the VIX at? When's the date for withdrawal? Why is he not telling us the exact date for withdrawal? This Monday morning quarterbacking of warfare, I think, has just gotten absolutely absurd. Whether you're pro-Trump or not pro-Trump, to have an expectation for him to come out there and lay out the next 5 weeks worth of attack plans, stay on point, make sure that the media blesses his strategy and keeps him accountable for it is just absurd. To me, it's like a drunken football fan in the stands trying to coach it from the sidelines, and they've never played in the game. They don't understand the game, but all of a sudden they're the smartest person in the room. So I didn't put a lot of merit in what he was saying. The gist of what I got is expect more of the same, if not more. And I think that's kind of what we're in for the near term. As an amateur guy in the stands, I guess I don't think this is going to draw out into midterms, because I think we're creatures of politics here. But I would not be sitting here crossing off days on a calendar. I think right now, all intended purposes, is the administration in Israel is in it to win it, and the Gulf is galvanizing behind that. So I wouldn't see any let up anytime in the near future.
It's funny, if you rode the couch as a Monday morning quarterback, Hamilton, I might have been kind of that D3 guy riding the pine, not much closer to the action in practice. But when you were talking, one of the things that struck me is a lot of the language we're seeing is almost being expressed in options terms, not as in alternatives, but as in the traded instrument, right? We've got various indices we're pointing to. Yeah, you mentioned the VIX, the Dow, the S&P, crude, and we've got timeframes against it. I mean, we are actually perceiving this conflict right now in options market terms, which, when you think about it, is odd, right? Because obviously you don't fight to time frame, you fight to objective. Yeah, even a personnel guy like me knows that. But what you're doing with option thinking is you are trading to time, and you're trading to time in chunks that are arbitrary relative to bigger accomplishment, right? You run a 90-day options contract, that doesn't tell you anything big picture about the price of crude, the VIX, or anything else. And when you're running a conflict on a 90-day option contract, you're largely doing the same thing. You're going to either win or lose. You're going to strike or not, right? And then you're going to renew that contract or that options contract for another X amount of time. And what you wind up doing is creating false deadlines, which, hey, cool. Any of us who's negotiated a contract knows that that's exactly what you do all the time, right? Hey, I need an answer by midnight on Friday, or this deal is not happening. All well and good. But if your adversary keeps fighting after that, so much for that strategy.
Yeah, if I could comment here, I think everything Hamlet said is spot on. I tend to look in terms of signal and noise, just to boil down just any scenario now, given the overflow of information and commentary and whatnot that's constantly flowing on any topic at this point. And I think the signal to noise of last night's presentation is exactly what Hamlet said. That was the signal. This is going to continue on. Escalate to de-escalate, I think, is exactly right. I think there's just no shortage of commentary that's really not helpful. I think in the run up to last night's statement, there was a range of hyperbolic exclamations. He's going to say this about NATO. He's going to back us out of NATO, or this, that, or the other thing. And it more plays to people's sort of biases in the moment with whatever they're expressing, rather than thinking through what are we discussing here. And I think the point about the experts, like once the shooting starts, like this is the time to sit back and really hold the tongue on a wide range of aspects of this, because there's just so much complexity that the professionals have to deal with, and this isn't helpful. I did, although Yanni, I did track the price of oil as the speech was going as well, because I was just out of curiosity, and I was watching it go up in real time, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, those are all great insights. And I think just keeping with the thought on signals here, Hamlet, this is something that we've talked a little bit about earlier, but I'd like to broaden this for the group, is the David versus Goliath concept here. And how is that shaping the fight, especially from the Iranian standpoint, and maybe what they're able to, the signals that they're sending to any adjacents in the region, the proxies in the region. I mean, is this giving them inspiration and hope that this is something they can go a few rounds longer? And also to tie in the economic aspect of that, how is this doing with them profiting in the revenue aspect? Because I think that's another area that it gets overlooked a lot, is Iran's ability to profit from this conflict.
There's a couple of ways where we can take this. So this is, I think, a great point. As a venture investor in this space, the fund that we set up, Iron Gate, has been focusing on defense tech and defense innovation for years. And really, it wasn't until the Ukraine conflict and now this, where people really understand what we're talking about, and why deploying capital, private capital in this space is so important. The collapsing cost of autonomous systems of drones is completely reshaping the battlefield. I mean, in Ukraine, in the last 18 to 24 months, we've seen a couple of $1 million in modified jet skis eviscerate billions of dollars of Russian naval assets in the Black Sea. We've seen, was it Operation Spiderweb, a couple $1 million in drones popping up out of panel trucks, eviscerate billions of dollars worth of Russian nuclear aircraft. And then here, what we're seeing is the Iranians are literally launching flying lawnmowers at our forces. These are the Shahed 136s. They're relatively inexpensive, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, not the most sophisticated pieces of hardware. Point, shoot, and it goes with an ordnance, and it causes a lot of damage. Well, to address that, we're launching billions of dollars worth of aircraft and aircraft carriers and THAAD systems and Patriot missiles. Those economies of scales they're not sustainable. And what's happening now is, as a nation state that traditionally doesn't have the balance sheet to field a massive Navy or a massive Air Force, is able to have the same debilitating effect that a first-rate superpower like the U.S. would have, because now they can help dictate terms in the sky and on the ground through the use of autonomy. So it's flattening that battlefield to a certain extent. So while we applauded the Ukrainians for all the phenomenal work they did in terms of fighting off the evil Russian bear using drones and drone warfare, we got to buckle up, because the exact opposite is about to happen to us from the Iranians. They've been itching and ready for this fight for forever. They didn't wake up in March and say, holy shit, the Americans are about to come. They've been getting ready for this. And it's not just them. You have the Houthis, who, I mean, the domestic production capabilities of Yemen is negligible, but they're able to fire off homegrown ordinances against our naval vessels. All sorts of reporting now, and obviously, Yanni, you can speak to this, but the PMF, the military or the militia forces in Iraq, if they're truly getting into this fight, this is no longer them just running at us with AKs. This democratization of autonomous warfare is really reshaping the battlefield. So, and this is where the economics of warfare in general come into play. How long can this be sustainable? From our standpoint, if we don't understand and adapt and learn how to fight smarter and more efficiently, this is going to be a problem.
Yeah, Yanni, feel free to jump in there, but those are great points, Hamlet. I mean, our ability to scale and how quickly can we get there mid-conflict?
I'll leave the conversation about the drone warfare and the battlefield laboratory that we've had in Ukraine to Ed, who's been not only just kind of seeing it from afar. He's the one of all of us that visits it and actually knows exactly what's going on the ground. So I'll leave that to him. But I will say this, that with the concept of David and Goliath, and this being a core conversation amongst the revolutionaries from the 1979 perspective and how they were going to export revolution as part of the little guy beating the big, machine out there. They don't appear to have any slowdown whatsoever in terms of their ability to sustain this longer. Now, the supplies may have withered somehow, but they don't seem to be we're coming up against some red line that we're not going to be able to continue. They're going to still keep producing the Shahed, and I think that their partners in this, being Russia and potentially China, may actually have something to do with them sustaining the fight. It's to their advantage, and I think that no matter how much everybody wants to make this compartmentalized, Ukraine, Russia, Iran, US, Asia Pacific, it's all interconnected, and I think that we're in a global conflict. I think people need to pay attention to what's the day after. Does the day after, when this thing slows down, when it does, is the day after going to leave us in a better place, or is it going to leave us in a worse place? Because if we came into this not with a US versus Iran or Iran versus Israel, these are very regional issues. But in the great power competition, do we want to have certain things happen that leave China stronger? Do we want to have certain things happen that makes us look weaker and isolationist? So in part one of this series, and I'll stop after this, we talked a lot about, because it was in the early days, it was the first week, right? We thought, okay, and I know I started having the conversation, well, maybe this is just like super clever by half, first Venezuela fell, and that takes 5% out of the China piece. And now, we're going after the 20% of China's thing. Maybe this is, for us, we're going to have control of oil, and we're going to have control of this. Screw those guys with the rare earths. We're going to stick it to them, with oil and everything else. And yesterday, the president said, Hormuz is for you guys to look after. It's not my bag. So again, I think Hamlet nailed it. We have to be careful not to look too deep into every single word that comes out of the president's mouth. We need to think thematically. But for me, we have to think about what's the strategy in great power competition long after the last Shahed flies, or long after, we call it a day and we say we won.
Yeah, I think that's really great points. And, Hamlet raised the Operation Spiderweb, that was June of last year. And everyone saw the results of that on the front page of the New York Times. But what it shows you is, the vulnerability that exists pretty much everywhere. I mean, every location, every facility that the U.S. has, all of our, equipment has some level of vulnerability to operations that have those features. There's layered defenses that can mitigate for, aspects of this. But again, the complexity is rising quickly. And and it's inspiring people to think from that David versus Goliath perspective, to say we've got a dog in this fight, and that's low cost, high effect, high impact, highly effective. When I think about the shot heads, and I spent a lot of time sort of looking at the evolution of them too. You have they've created the decoys that are launched in Ukraine, along with the actual really lethal ones, trying to eat up limited resources, trying to pull attention away from all kinds of batteries and all kinds of defensive techniques, and it's effective. I mean, it's the Ukrainians have been pretty good if you look at the math of what their interception rate has been through various techniques over time. But again, the Iranians have been evolving and the Russians as well have been evolving the capability to develop jet engine Shaheeds as well. To the extent that can become mass produced, that just again adds more complexity to the layered defenses that you have to build up to protect. And and when you look at the Ukraine example, let's say 100 Shaheeds are launched right now. It's a large country. There's a lot of key infrastructure to protect, and then of course the intent of those is also terror. So really, while you're protecting all your key infrastructure, the secondary effect is, okay, well that's great, but if they also just start hitting high rises, which the Russians routinely do, is intending to try to break the will of the people, because one of the strongest things in Ukraine you'll find is the will of the people. I mean, the cumulative trauma is piling up on them. But the determination, when you talk to any of them, when they say, like, there's just no alternative. I mean, the mindset is there is no alternative, and that's true given Russia's intent. But this shows you just how effective these the scale is going to be, and really concerning for us from a global standpoint. This creates vulnerability assessments requirements for us on every inch of the planet. And I think Yanni's point about this sort of, we really need to be looking at this as all one kind of fight right now. This is holistically we're in quite the fight.
Yeah, Tom, I'm curious your opinion as well, especially from the commercial standpoint. And there's a lot through the economic lens that needs to be unpacked from this David versus Goliath dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about the notion that the Strait of Hormuz is not a U.S. problem, and it should be left to those who benefit from the flow of oil or commodities through it. And that's all well and good if you think of global energy consumption and trade as segmented, compartmentalized, and not connected. What it reminds me of is the fundamental U.S. issue, for example, where we can increase drilling in the U.S., but that doesn't really get us as much energy independence as you think, because what we process in the U.S. is not what we drill in the U.S. So right away, you've got an export dynamic, regardless of whether you're doing it yourself, right? You may generate a bit more trade balance that way, but that's all you're getting, right? You may get some trade leverage that way, but it's hardly independence. Now, when you think of us not being affected by what goes through Hormuz, the other issue that comes to mind is obviously price of various forms of crude or other commodities based on increases in the price of crude, right? So if you're producing in the U.S. either by drilling or refining, there are other parts of the world now where oil products are becoming more expensive. That's probably who you want to sell to, provided that you can do so while absorbing those distribution costs. I mean, this is just math, right? And that sort of math is pretty direct in energy. And then the indirect aspects of that pile up pretty quickly, given how much energy it requires to ship energy products, let alone to create and ship other products, right? So this isn't like knee bones connected to the hip bone type stuff. This is pretty direct and pretty relevant. To the earlier point, like, we're not going to parse every word that comes out in a speech. True. And I think on something like this, to sit back for a bit, wait for the realization of these interconnection issues with regard to oil trade to permeate the market for a little bit, permeate government for a little bit, and you'll start to see nuanced left turn, right turn stuff to get us to where we need to be. I think you have to look at it as iterative. You know, if you're looking for the old days of like big grand speech followed by a course of action and another big grand speech and another, that's not where we are, right? You're going to see speeches, you're going to see some reaction to it. Market reaction will drive some policy and security discussion, and then you'll see kind of the incremental changes that are necessary. May not be perfect, may not be satisfying, but you get there in the end.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, yeah, you brought this up, and I think it's important to open the aperture and understand how these seemingly independent conflicts or regionalized conflicts are tied together. So one thing I'd like to discuss, and Ed, you hit on it, but really let's dive a little bit deeper, is the connectivity between the conflict in Ukraine and this ongoing conflict in Iran. The biggest point being, we're seeing Russia launch into its spring offensive. We know that their economy is struggling. They heard a number of different instances of analysis that are suggesting that Russia is going into this at a disadvantage. Is this a pivotal time for them to potentially gain some advantage through this conflict? I mean, is this? It sounds counterintuitive, but I think it's worth an evaluation.
Yeah, and I think yeah, the short answer is yes. The devil's going to be in the details. As I've said on some other talks, there's sort of a band of that a lot of activity takes place in a band, and when you're outside of the band is when we start getting meaningful change, where the boot is on the neck of one side or the other, and that's the band I'm describing. And I think this issue is going to stay within the band. It's not going to push boot onto Ukraine's neck, so to speak, in any way, materially to end what's happening there in Russia's favor. But it is to their advantage. And, it's also not to their advantage, further and further to see, all these parties sort of kind of showing what we all already know about their affiliations and how they support each other. But again, all this is taking place inside a band in terms of the Ukraine context and Ukraine's, ability to survive this threat head on. But what Ukraine has also underscored pretty clearly, is how interconnected the support that they get is. Both where the Russians get support from Iran and from North Korea and from China with respect to supply chains. The supply chain obfuscations that are taking place are also iterative and they're staying ahead of our ability to stomp it out, and in ways that keep the Russian war machine moving. And they're adaptive. And the more and more we need to understand this interconnectedness and see it for the fight that it is.
I think there's an issue of planning, objective, and tolerance in here as well, right? If you're looking at Russia's economic strain and kind of their chasing supply chain function on this iterative basis, relative to the kind of disruption and strain that they're able to tolerate in pursuit of their objectives, it's an open question as to whether that is actually worse than what we're seeing in the West right now, where as we are supplying different allies, partner states, what have you, with material, equipment, ammunition keeps coming up. It's not an existential issue for us, but our tolerance doesn't go anywhere near an existential issue. Our tolerance is driven by, doctrine and planning and strategy, where it's like, oh, if we go below this level, we feel like we're broke. It may be highly advantaged compared to our adversaries, but A, is it enough to support our strategy? And B, is it enough for us to feel comfortable with a certain amount of supremacy and dominance relative to multiple adversaries at the same time? Blah, 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 right? I think it's an important distinction to keep in mind. Russia may be struggling economically. The extent to which that is meaningful is different, though, because their scale is different from ours. And where does our will end as the United States, as NATO, as Western Bloc, with regard to depletion of capabilities and kind of readiness ability relative to what we've invested so far in the various conflicts we're either directly or indirectly party to?
Hamlet, you want to take it for a sec, and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, like I think that last part when we're talking about of will, I think it's important because all conflict is based on that. Is you win by breaking the other side's will to fight or breaking their ability to fight. Yeah, I do think that if you look at what's happening right now between China, the conflict here in between Iran and Ukraine, even Venezuela, those are all interrelated topics and issues. And I love you, Yanni, but I'm going to start zapping you every time I hear you use the word strategic competition or great power competition. I want to control, alt, delete that entire word out of our vernacular. We're in a war. This is a cold war. This is a war of ideologies. China does not want to play nice and pat us on the back for finishing second place. They want to eviscerate our style of global governance. They want to replace it with theirs. That's not competition. That's conflict. There's no strategy to that. And I think the sooner we embrace that, the sooner we can address it. Complex problems like this begin with understanding and framing the problem properly. To understand that this isn't just to happens that Russia and China and Iran are all of a sudden friends. This is, I think, a long planned strategy to basically challenge Western authority. And I think we're in the middle of that. I've always said there's two things you don't realize you're in until it's too late. And that's usually a bad relationship or a marriage. And the other is war. And I think war is a bad relationship or marriage gone wrong on a geopolitical scale. And we're in it right now.
It's Hamlet. I think that this is we can certainly have an air power discussion with Mark, and we can have a discussion with you on great power competition, Zap. But the issue here is this: I use the word competition only because I'm sick and tired of people that want to just sit there and talk about. China should stop doing this, or China has a problem with this in Iraq, or they sank my battle. Yeah, it's like it's competition, man. You have to actually compete in this arena. You can't just browbeat them or just call them names. You have to have a better idea. You have to have a better concept. And in that, and I'll tie this in with what we're talking about right here. The oil that we're talking about it in dollars, $112. We're not talking about it in 2000 won or baht or pounds, So having the pole position and actually being in control matters. Okay. And when we abandon that pole position, things happen and there are unintended consequences. So we can actually sit there and say, well, it's your problem. Well, who? Cambodia, Vietnam, Sudan? Whose problem is it? Because they're not going to send their, ships to go out there to the Persian Gulf and to the Strait of Hormuz and somehow decapitate Iran. There's only a few countries, and I would say I could probably have it in one finger that can actually do this sort of thing. So I think that we need to be careful not to, getting away from competition and conflict. I think that we need to be careful how we look at this in terms of strategy. And I'll give you two things. Yeah. First, it's not uncommon nor irrational to consider that the alligator closer to the boat is what matters, to some people. Ukraine is going to care first about what's happening with Russia on that front and its eastern side. UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain, they're going to think about those things coming their way first before they start thinking about, South Korea or Ukraine. But at one point, things are going to start coming together because they interplay. And I can envision a point where Ukraine is going to actually be in a great place once we hit equilibrium to teach the Emiratis and the Qataris and everybody else how to leverage counter drone technology. But for us as a superpower, the only superpower that we may want to give up the throne, but to me, I think that we need to think about it twice or three times because those pole positions give us an enormous advantage, and I don't think that we should let it go.
No, but when you look at the Monroe Doctrine being re-embraced, Monroe never would have imagined that embracing his doctrine is actually to cede large swaths of influence. which is exactly what we're looking at right now, right? Let's return to our hemisphere that mattered to us, literally 200 years ago. And in doing so, yes, let's allow Ukraine to teach the lessons on drone warfare to the rest of the world. Let's allow Europe to control more than 20% of the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, control influence, right? Let's just call it either or, both, column A, column B, right? Let's cede this level of leadership in pursuit of a 2-century-old doctrine. I'm not getting it. What I will say, though, regarding competition and war, just to settle for Yanni and Hamlet, I get the use of competition because there is so much metaphorical warfare being banged around right now. Like, as a cyber and economic guy, I mean, cyber war, no. Economic war, no. Yes, they play a role in the broader effort and can be used both in competition and in warfare. But I'm with Clausewitz on this one. I think you have to have a certain amount of death and destruction for it to count.
Bringing in the Clausewitz. I love it.
I know, man. Crazy Carl made it into the show.
But, this is, you can do a lot when you have partnerships. And this is one of those moments where partnerships do matter. And you theoretically could be more focused on the Western Hemisphere with robust partnerships that are dividing the strategy. So our partnerships are under strain right now, and that's a challenge. And we really that's a key feature of this, particularly in the direction we're going.
Yeah.
As a world, we have to as we're thinking about where we want to get to and planning accordingly. We really do need to think about where the chips are all falling in terms of the partnership array.
Yeah, look, I think we're all in one way, shape, or form alumni of the global war on terror, where America was world police. And I think having gone 20 years of that, we've all realized America cannot and should not be the world police. So, like it or not, and this is not an endorsement or critique of what the president has done, to me, it seems like he's gone to Europe and said, "Listen, we fought your battle for 2 years. We can't do this anymore. Step up, and you gotta carry your weight." We're now knocking things over in Iran, and at some point, listen, we can't keep on doing this by ourselves. We got to worry about the big bad Chinese bear in Southeast Asia. We need you guys to come in and help keep the straits open. And at some point, we're going to probably, not say retract is probably the wrong word, but focus on things that matter closer to home. So I don't want to stray too far off the subject, but that whole concept of Shield America is about applying the Monroe Doctrine to the Americas, because for the most part, if you look at from Canada all the way down to the tip of Argentina, the roots of the society and culture there are it's Western Europe. That's who settled and kind of fostered the Americas. So, which is it? Are we America's world police, and we're just going to show up wherever we can and knock things over and go home, or are we going to try to get some of these people off their butt for them to kind of fight their own battles in their own turf? So, I would love a future where we're not having to do that all the time.
Let me just throw this thing in here, because I love these conversations when they start getting channelized in one either ors. America can walk and chew gum at the same time. We could have the Monroe Doctrine because we had forgotten that maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't have China take over the Panama Canal. Maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't have China have space stations in South America and listening stations all over the place. And maybe we shouldn't have Russian ships pulling into Cuba again and Akula submarines, show up. Maybe, just maybe, all that stuff. And we could actually have impact in the Middle East. And maybe we should also have, impact in economic competition, or whatever you want to call it, in Africa. These are one-offs. When you start channelizing, you start creating problems. Not even 6 months ago, if you went to the Pentagon, you would probably hear something about, it's a pivot to Asia moment again. It's all about Indo-PACOM. We're going to shift resources over there because that's where it's supposed to be. Then I would have argued, hey, listen, China is playing in Africa and Middle East and South America. Yes, you can shift research, but you got to play on a global battlefield. It's not just, locational. Now, what's happening? What's happening now? It's no longer, that pivot to Asia is dead. It's, to me, it's a concept that it should be retired or put 6 feet under the ground, because it's all about global engagement. It's all about, it's not globalism. It's not any of that stuff. It's just our battlefields are the whole world. It's not the Straits of Hormuz or the Straits of Gibraltar or the Strait of Taiwan and China.
Yeah, trade does that for us. Speed of transportation does that to us. You're absolutely right. Just as, leaving Europe to deal with the Strait of Hormuz doesn't protect us from energy availability or price movement in the U.S. I'm with you 100%. If you want to fight China economically, that's going to happen in Africa, in the Middle East, in the ports of Miami, Long Beach, and Newark, right? I mean, this is where it happens. And the notion of being prepared for that, I think, is what's really in question, right? Historically, the U.S. had this notion of being able to fight like East and West wars at the same time, right? The World War II model. Well, now what we're looking at is that maybe one war, probably would be, and it would span, conflict, trade, kind of metaphorical and literal conflict. And we need to prepare for that. We need to prepare for shortages of input materials, or figure out how to get them, right? I mean, the classic case is the SR-71 being made with Soviet titanium. We may still be able to get what we need to, but we need to know how that's going to happen. I don't think right now we've had that World War II manufacturing moment where we think about, how to supply the machine, on short notice as we need to. And, the whole concept of procurement has been on annual cycles. And what we're looking at now is, conflict is becoming a given rather than a periodic manifestation. Well, okay, like we have to do that. Security is a cost. It's a hedge. Can you use that cost to generate more comfortable or longer term returns? Possibly. But either way, you're still putting locks on your doors. You're still preparing for XYZ contingency, and we need to expand that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that supply chain question is crucial, and there's two sides to that, right? It's like how do we ensure our own supply chain, and how do we disrupt our adversaries' supply chains? And there's obviously a lot of interrelation between both sides of that coin, but that is probably, those are the kind of decisions that need to be, and I know they are being discussed now, because when you're in multiple crises and your hair is on fire, is not the time to start planning to developing a plan for addressing that. And I do think we're moving towards less stability. I mean, it's hard to look at the world and say we're moving towards more stability at this point. So I think it would behoove us to really address this as one of the most primary issues, because that's going to be about the enduring nature of how we fight back.
Yeah, and Yanni, I know you had a great question for Ed, and maybe you do a better job of framing it, but it's around Russia and their ability to benefit from what's going on here. Give your take, Yanni. I think you can be able to pitch it better than I.
Yeah, Ed, I've been very intent every time we have these conversations to kind of understand the environment from the opponent's perspective. We've always talked about, how is Iraq and somebody else in Iraq thinking about some of this. Hamlet has enlightened us on, what's the perspective of some Iranian, not just from a diaspora perspective, but also from there. But of all of us here, you've had perhaps the closest insights on how Russia looks at certain things and their behavior, and you've been in the trenches countering them. how are they viewing, this, even the president's conversation yesterday, or speech yesterday, but really the latest actions that we've had over the last week?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it kind of goes back to something that Hamlet was discussing too. When you guys were discussing whether it's competition or war and whatnot. Russia has been in a state of war against the West for quite some time, and it really probably hasn't. It's probably been continuous, going back through the Soviet Union days in terms of the mindset and their cognitive warfare strategy, which is constantly playing out everywhere on the planet, is incredibly powerful and effective. Excuse me. Excuse me. Highly effective. So much so that it also we watched so much with the Ukraine-Russia after the full invasion, watching the continuous escalation conversations about every inch we decided to move forward, and how eventually we would come around to the right decision, but we would come so late, and so telegraphed, in ways that diminish in part the effectiveness of what we were bringing to the table. And a lot of that framing of the sort of escalation narratives is part of Russia's cognitive warfare strategies and putting us in a box about how we think about them, and they've done a masterful job of that. As a corollary, though, Russia's intention is to break us, right? They don't build things; they break things, and breaking things is a lot easier than building things. And so, what we have happening right now, again, with this increased sort of, threats to our critical relationships, the challenges of supply chain, having multiple fights going on the planet like this, it continues to break the things that hold us together and make us powerful. It won't terminate us. I mean, we're not close. We're not at existential risk from this. But what we are doing is walking in part down a path that I think is beneficial for them overall, as our relationships start to disintegrate, and we continue to show our capabilities, show our gaps, show our limits, in ways that Russia's seeing perfectly clear. So is China. That's all to their advantage. That's part of the necessity of this. Once it starts, I mean, there's not some, you're not gonna. Once the bullets start flying, I mean, there's awareness is going to come with respect to our capabilities and our limits. But I think Russia is more than happy to see how I don't want to call it disarray. I think that's too strong of a word, but just how chaotic some things feel right now.
Yeah, that's great. We're closing out at this point. That was a great discussion, and I just want to give everyone the opportunity to go around, give some closing remarks, maybe some insights as to what we can look ahead to as we move into week 6 of the conflict here.
Yeah, I guess I'll start, Jackie, since I'm next to you in the window. I think that I remain very optimistic about the way things will turn out. I'm not one of these doom and gloom people. I think our military, our intelligence services, and quite frankly, the government has been, even the commercial and treasury, I think they're actually doing some phenomenal things. And I don't take this, we're losing to the Iranians, but I think we need to stay the course and stay true to our objectives. Nobody else's objectives, our objectives, U.S. national interests. Where are they? What are we trying to achieve? And if we think of it that way, I think we will, no matter what the rhetoric is, I think we'll realize that we do need our partners, and we do need to stay in the region, and we do need to be involved because we're the great synchronizer in many regards and viewed that way, and it will be to our benefit. And the next week, before we talk again, I think we're probably in for some surprises. I think that there's quite a lot of capabilities that are just making their way to the Gulf and the region. And the opponents also have some tricks up their sleeve that I think they'll keep throwing at us. Thanks again.
Yeah, excellent points. Hamlet, over to you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think escalate to de-escalate is still going to be the theme. I do think you do have a scenario where we may see forces more directly engaged on Iranian soil. The Iranians have been preparing for this, I think, for potentially for as long as 20 years, if you look at and believe in mosaic theory of Iran and how the defenses have been set up. So I would expect the conventional conflict to continue and continue to escalate. I do think at some point that conventional conflict dies off, and you turn into much more of a prolonged, asymmetric, irregular warfare. And then that's where the cognitive piece gets dialed up, because I think they want to make sure that they break our will, our society's will, to want to continue this fight. And on the other side, I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to exact as much cost on the regime as possible. And I'm not saying on Iranian society, but turn up the pressure to the point where the average rank and file Iranian with any kind of wealth and power and sway is going to stand up and say, okay, enough. We're not dying with this regime. We're going to actually help the Americans and the Israelis kind of purge this out. And if Iran wants to be a free country, they've got to take this upon themselves to fight that fight from the inside out. We're not going to do that for them. We should not do that for them. So when is that going to happen? I don't know, April 13th, 12th, I don't know. There's no guessing to that. I think the tipping point will come. And I think we'll know when we see it, but I don't think it's a day or weeks away.
Yeah, just another bet to wager. Go ahead, Tom.
I'd say economically, I'm less focused on the conflict itself. It'll end when it ends in due course, and is unlikely to be a protracted boots on the ground type exercise. Maybe remote will go on a little bit longer. But what I look at as more interesting, especially from an economic standpoint, is what the years after that look like. And as you plan for economic disruption, how many more of these conflicts do you need to plan for, driven by the U.S., Russia, or otherwise, in the next decade or two? This is going to become a growing cost of doing business, whatever your business is.
Yeah, and I'll wrap up here. I completely agree, Tom, and Yanni. I think I'm probably more on the pessimistic side. It just is the pain that's coming, I think, is substantial, and we have to have the fortitude to push through it to get to the other side of it, and it is going to be difficult. I think what Tom just laid out is exactly the horizon we need to be prepared for, and let's hope it doesn't come to it, but let's sure as hell prepare for it.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. This is another great discussion. I look forward to next week for week 6. For our audience, if you have questions, comments, please drop them in the comment section. We're always open to fielding those as we roll at the next one. So on behalf of Irregular Warfare Initiative, thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.